So this is just so you can actually just see how you have that and then that cluster down there. Okay? So first, we just then disregarded 1918 through 1939 and just started with 1940, where we had our first shooting within the past 100 years. And we looked at shooting incidents by region, all right? And what we see is that the West has the largest number of school-based mass shootings. Okay. Next. Okay. Now, this is the same data. I just turned it slightly different, and I'm afraid to use the pointer, but we will try.
The pointer is not going to work on the TV screen. I use it. I know very well.
Okay, so if you can look up and find April 20th, 1999, okay, that actually is literally the midpoint, right? That's Columbine. And you see how, so you from 1940 to up to Columbine, you got this, that almost 60-year period, you have the same number of incidents as you have in the past 20 years. Okay. So we then narrowed our focus again down to those 20 years. But first, we took the whole pool and we looked at where is this phenomenon occurring. So you see here that, as you might expect, the smallest number of incidents is in the elementary school level and works up to 60% in the senior high school level. However, go to the next one. If you look on this chart at number of fatalities, what you find is that the number of fatalities and injuries at the elementary schools is disproportionately higher than their number of incidents in the population. And so the question is why? All right. And so, oh, go back. There, okay. And so what we did was we pulled out characteristics of the perpetrator, okay, for each of these school levels. And what we find, interestingly enough, is that the median age for perpetrators at elementary schools is older than the other two categories. It's possible that maybe that has some reason to do with the fact that their fatalities and injuries are disproportionately higher. In other words, it's not elementary school children who are doing the shooting in elementary schools. However, some of the policy solutions that have been proposed wouldn't necessarily be effective. For instance, it's been proposed, well, we'll just put the metal detectors at all the schools, like they have in the urban schools. Well, one of these elementary school shootings was by a 16-year-old girl, former student, who was shooting from across the street, from her porch. So a metal detector would not have stopped that. Okay. Let me see. You can also see that the lowest median age is in the middle school. And that's also where you have the lowest number of deaths and injuries. The age of the median age for senior high school students is worth noting. I mean, it came in at 17.5. Most of them were students. Some of them were 18, some were 16, one 19. But all these people are legally minors. They can't buy alcohol. But in every single incident, all of the weapons used were legally acquired, all right? Either the shooter was able to buy them the weapons themselves, or it was their parents' supply. Yes?
Sorry, did you say that they're legally acquired for just the high
For all of them. For all of them. All of them. Now, obviously, the middle school, those were probably their parents' guns. Okay. So what?
No, no. Ab initio. Why did the government allow self-ammunition in the site? Why?
Why did they allow the sale of ammunition?
Yes, in society. Why?
Well, there is a debate about the meaning of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees the right, something about a militia, a well-regulated militia, and the right to bear arms. But the arms that people were bearing back then, you know, they were long guns. You had to load the powder and the single bullet, and you just couldn't get off too many rounds, right? So there is a debate that people have a constitutional right to carry guns. Now, the problem is our weapons have gotten progressively more deadly. And weapons that were developed for military use are now available for regular people to buy. So, for instance, in many jurisdictions, you can buy an assault weapon even though you're too young to buy a handgun. Right? Okay, next one. So, if you look at this trend line, you see that, okay, we had a high point in 1999, it went down 2005, and then started going progressively up, all right? Now, okay, so the interesting thing about this is in 1994, the assault weapons ban was passed. It expired in 2004. And you see 2005 is where we started seeing increasing numbers of school-based mass shootings. What I wanted to point out to you was, remember the trend line we looked at before and the shape? Okay. That directionality was caused by 5 incidents. Because everything else is, you know, I don't want to say relatively low, because we're talking about children and teachers being killed. Okay? But we have these 5 outliers. And it's those incidents that are driving the trend. Okay? So if we just look at this 20-year period, what you see is that the West still has the largest number of injuries, but the lowest, next to lowest number of fatalities. Okay? Which is slightly different from when you looked at it from 1990, right? The largest number of fatalities for this 20-year period have shifted to the South, okay, followed by the Northeast. Okay. It's worth looking at the weapons used because, as I said, all of these weapons used were acquired legally. In more than half the instances, machine guns were used. Quarter of the cases, short barrel shotguns, rifles in 10%, and those destructive devices, those were grenades or handmade bombs. Okay. So what you get from this is that these were not shootings that occurred because somebody got upset. These were planned. Okay. So when you look at the state firearm laws, and this goes back to your question about why can you buy this, okay? There's 7 basic type of restrictions. Prohibitions for high-risk individuals. If you fall in certain categories, you can't get a firearm. If you have a domestic violence conviction or stalking conviction, stay-away order, you can't get a firearm. Some jurisdictions have mandatory background checks. Now, I want to point out that, and this number of jurisdictions include the 50 states plus the District of Columbia, which until Heller versus United States, Heller versus District of Columbia, had a fairly strict gun control law. Okay. So what we see is the types of bans that would do the most to reduce what we're seeing in this area, the assault weapons ban and the high capacity magazine ban are the ones that are adopted by the smallest number of states. All right? And the stand your ground is there, but it's not a restriction. It's more of an affirmative use, affirmative right to self-defense. You know, somebody's bothering you on the street or in the gas station, you can shoot them. Okay. So I want to point out that even though these variety of restrictions exist, a third of the states only have adopted one of them. In terms of the assault weapons ban and the high-capacity magazine ban, I want to point out California and Connecticut. Now, California banned assault weapons after an elementary school shooting. Okay. Connecticut, before Sandy Hook, had prohibited some type of assault weapons. After Sandy Hook, they tightened the regulations, although a modified AK-47, 47, numbers are not my thing, especially guns, is actually still legal in Connecticut. Okay? But what they added to their ban after Sandy Hook was a ban on high-capacity magazine rounds. Okay? So the emerging challenge is and so other than those two states which reacted to incidents, the states that had the major school-based mass shootings really don't have these types of restrictions. Now, Colorado has a high-capacity magazine ban. That was post-Columbine. Okay. The other interesting thing about these shooters that we're going to pursue further is that for the really large-scale ones, the ones that kind of, the outliers, okay, in many of those instances, there was a trace of online radicalization by far-right groups. They had expressed some interest in the militia movement or like neo-Nazis. Even one of the incidents that was above the trend line actually was on a Native American reservation. And the shooter was a Native American. And he actually identified with the Klan because he supported their separation of the races, because he was 16 and he was concerned about Native Americans marrying non-Native Americans. Columbine took place on April the 20th, deliberately, because that was Adolf Hitler's birthday. Okay. So the point we're trying to make is that while we see a lot of concern in this country about online radicalization, you know, jihadists, you know, Islamic radicals want to radicalize everybody online, there is a much more subtle online radicalization occurring on the far right. So just quickly, some of the other things we're pursuing with this that we have identified, in addition to the distinction and the grade levels and the ages, there is a marked difference in the socioeconomic conditions of the communities. Okay? So school-based mass shootings largely occur in upper middle class affluent communities. They do not occur in the inner cities. So what we're seeing, and the question is this due to, you know, from a criminological perspective, are we seeing manifestations of anomie among a group of young people, largely young males, who are just alienated from society? Despite what people would think, they seem to have lots of advantages. They're alienated from society. And like other young people do, they are finding companionship in these online forums. Okay. Some of the other policy implications really have to do with the thing that nobody wants to talk about, which is that if you want to stop school-based mass shootings, you really have to control the availability of, assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And that's very clear. The jurisdictions, admittedly it was only about 8, that have some type of regulation of those, don't have those shootings, or haven't had them since they adopted those regulations. Okay. The other challenge moving forward on this is the role that 3D printers are going to play in terms of creating guns. So even if guns, certain types of weapons are banned, how do you control what somebody makes on their printer in their basement? Okay. Are there any questions? Yes.
Well, there is an idea about the copycat syndrome. I look up the
Yes.
stuff, mass shootings
Mhm.
also. I do terrorism.
Mhm.
So they were talking about the media depictions
Mhm.
of the mass shooters, definitely, especially after Columbine.
Right.
So your data kind of proves that
Mhm.
point, because some of those kids, even though in the upper middle class schools,
Mhm.
they want to be, famous. They want to be, Have you
Well-
ever looked at kind of research and see maybe?
We've started looking at that, but not too closely. We're still trying to get the larger overall picture. But one of the things is that, for instance, we want to find other reasons, not us, but society. So we really want to say these children are mentally ill. So if they had just been referred to social services, this wouldn't have happened. To the extent that, for instance, the state of Florida now has this questionnaire they want parents to fill out, basically about, has your child been to see a mental health professional? Now that's problematic for a whole lot of areas, but yet they would not pass the handgun restrictions. But and the other thing is, if society attributes this to mental illness, or there's research that talks about bullying, as I said, we don't have to address the underlying issue. And I'm not unsympathetic. Kids have always been getting bullied. But you don't want somebody who's been bullied and can now get assault weapons. But yeah.
When you drill down on some of the individual cases in the course of the research, you get the implication that there was some copycatting going on. But you have to drill down on the individual cases. And as you know, time and resources kind of prohibit you from looking at each and every individual involved in the shooting. But when you do, that's what you find.
Has there been any conviction?
Have there been any convictions?
Yeah.
There have been some, but what happens is many of these people either kill themselves at the end or they're killed by police. One person actually was caught, sent to prison, and he ended up somehow dying in prison. In Parkland shooting case, he was caught, even though he tried to slip out with the other students, and is awaiting trial. Yes.
Well, I want to say this as preferred solution with the trends of murder and crimes and killings. Can't they inculcate this education in the curriculum in the schools, whereby they discourage the school young boys to forget all this kind of shooting and to put a verdict or a sanction on whosoever is caught? Number one. Number two, I've seen a lot of the forensic files whereby sporadic shootings, killings of spouse, parents, cremation of a lot of things, imprisonment, life imprisonment without parole. Does that remove this crime from society? There is this societal influence and simply factors should be eroded from the family. From
So
the,
I
from
just
the
want to
side.
briefly address your question about education. So the approach some jurisdictions have been taking, well, let me place it in context. Remember the slides that talked about where the largest numbers of incidents occurred or where the largest number of fatalities occurred, okay? That has meaning because they're occurring in parts of the country where there is just a strong gun culture. People like to take their guns and go out hunting. That's fine. I'm just not trying to shoot Bambi's mother, but you know, it is considered a sport, and people take their small children and take them to target ranges and shoot them, and so for them the education is safe use of firearms, right? What the schools are looking at in some schools is what do you do if there's an active shooter? So schools are now having active shooter drills where children are taught to huddle under their desk and make sure the door is shut in case somebody comes in. All right. But if you're asking, is there education teaching people why they shouldn't do this in the first place? The answer is no. The answer is no. Any other questions? Yes.
Have you found any correlation between where school shootings and mass school shootings occur and open carry law?
Yes.
So not to get no more government, but yes.
Okay, I assume so. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Again, affluence is been correlated to it as well. Kind of back to your point about education and fees. There's no real profile for who's going to be the next school mass shooter. So there's no really, you're going to do it, you're going to do it, you're going to do it. So because that doesn't exist and we don't have a minority report kind of society where we can predict who's going to be that person to commit the shooting, you can, I think most of us have been, you know, bombarded with this shouldn't happen, this is a bad thing, but unfortunately the places where this is occurring is in communities where people don't even expect for it to occur. So that kind of education isn't going on in those school systems.
Okay, thank you.